We're going to do that right now with visiting professor at the University of California, Irvine, and an Israel Institute fellow, Dr. Alon Burstein. He joins me now. Thanks so much for being with us here. I know we've spoken before. You've been here on Live Now from Fox before many times. My question to you, though, now is, why is this happening? Why is the Biden State Department taking action against some of these extremist Jewish settlers there in the West Bank? Is this, or should this be the focus right now in the Israel-Hamas war, or is this just a distraction? What's going on here?
So first of all, thank you for having me back. It's always nice to be here. I'd say that there are two reasons that the Biden administration is now taking action specifically against the radical settler activity. One is that there's a genuine fear that a second front will open up for Israel. The settler activity in the West Bank and its friction with the Palestinians is a constant threat to stability in the region. And there's a lot of turmoil in Israel about the fact that a lot of army bases and army units may have been diverted from the Gaza Strip in order to protect the settlements in the West Bank. But more broadly, there's a lot of fear. Hamas has called on Palestinians in the West Bank. It is called, just as it is called on Hezbollah and Lebanon, to all join the fray. And there's just a lot of fear in the U.S. administration that these ongoing attacks by settlers against Palestinians are going to ignite a second front for Israel, which is going to make the war a lot more complicated. So I think that's one side of it. A second side of it relates to the domestic pressure. The Biden administration has been overwhelmingly supportive of Israel in the war, both in the United Nations and vocally and diplomatically. However, there is also a lot of criticism in the Democratic Party regarding, and we see this among surveys, regarding this unwavering support, suggesting maybe the Biden administration should be restraining Israel a little bit more. Maybe it should condition aid to Israel on Israel abiding by all kinds of either international humanitarian laws or U.S. interests. And so I think this is a way also for the Biden administration to easily say we are flexing our muscles vis-a-vis Israel, but not in a way that actually is going to restrict Israel in the wars. I think both those things are coming together.
You know, I'm just kind of curious your thoughts about the settlement question writ large, in the wake of October 7th, primarily there in the West Bank. Do you anticipate when all is said and done there in Gaza that we'll see more settlement expansion, or will Israeli officials caution Israelis not to do that, to kind of stem that practice here? Or are we are we getting too far ahead of ourselves here on that question?
We're always too far ahead of ourselves, but I mean, that's sort of our job to be speculating because no one really knows what Israel's final aim is. Israel's under heavy criticism from the United States for not having its day after plan was going to be in the Gaza Strip. There is a strong lobby in the Israeli government that is saying Israel should not only reoccupy the Gaza Strip, but reestablish the settlements there that it had taken apart and evacuated in 2005. In turn, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has done everything but say explicitly that's not going to happen. He has said that Israel will maintain security establishments and will have security control of the Gaza Strip. But he has said Israel is not intending to reinstate settlements. In turn, it is very likely that he will try to appease his right-wing coalition by expanding settlements in the West Bank. So if the Prime Minister does not manage to actually deliver on what the hawkish right-wing elements in his government want and expand settlements or reinstate settlements in the Gaza Strip, he may try to expand settlements in the West Bank as sort of a payoff to them in order to say, yes, I'm not delivering on your ideology here, but here you can get it on this side. So we may see more activity in the West Bank. I highly doubt that we'll actually see settlements rebuilt in the Gaza Strip. That will be almost diplomatic suicide on Israel's part. I just can't imagine that will actually happen.
Yeah, it does seem like, that part of the conversation about this war is so front and center about what will happen to Gaza when all is said and done. And some are saying that it's somewhat of a foregone conclusion, that maybe the UN will have to be involved, maybe the Palestinian Authority will have to be involved. But now it seems like that conversation is reorienting itself to maybe Israel itself will have to be involved in some capacity in administering the Gaza Strip in some fashion. And some people are very hesitant to use the word reoccupy here. But Bibi Netanyahu came out and said, the IDF should be involved in the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, once and if Hamas is extirpated here. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here as well because the war still is ongoing, but it seems like that question is front and center. Do you think that should be the main focus about what happens to Gaza when all is said and done in the middle of the war?
I do think that to some extent that should be the focus, because what we've seen in history, what we saw in Afghanistan, what we saw in Iraq, and in Afghanistan twice, what we saw after 1989, and what we saw in 2020, 2021 is when you go in without a plan, you can win against organizations. You can win against terror groups. You can even, to some extent, dismantle them. But if you don't have a plan to rebuild that also involves something from the local grassroots organizations, local grassroots population, you're likely going to end up backfiring. It is very rare in international settings. It is very rare if we look at any conflict that a group, a terror group, has been managed to be destroyed by its enemy, sheer repression, and doesn't come back something more radical. So only if you actually have a plan for what comes in its place, and not just, you occupying the same way as in Afghanistan or in Iraq to some extent, but actually creating something from the ground up, from the local population, is the only chance that you have at not repeating October 7th and not having this later on. So in that sense, I do think that we're right to be asking the question.
Okay.
I'm not sure that we actually know what Israel's plan is.
Gotcha. In the meantime, I want to move to the fighting itself, which, has really been exacerbated and has ramped up ever since the ceasefire, of course, is no longer operative there. Specifically, though, in southern Gaza now, we have this live picture there outside of this hospital in Khan Yunis. I want to put up this tweet that you posted today. You said substantial fire belt bombardments reported in Khan Yunis as IDF forces enter the heart of the southern city. IDF reporting taking over Hamas main headquarters in Jabalia as forces prepare to enter the Sajia stronghold as well. And you said more info in your daily summary in a few hours. We can get to that in just a moment. But, Alon, I'm kind of curious. We speak to the IDF quite regularly here, including Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. He's getting kind of a lot of heat for these comments that he made on another program about the nature of modern warfare itself, how Israel is conducting this war. I know you and my colleagues have kind of gone back and forth about, how can Israel do this, precise targeting of Hamas militants, rather, when they're getting so much criticism, calling, the war indiscriminate, their targeting as well. Jonathan Conricus said, in the history of modern warfare, the Israel record is quite astonishing, saying that, for every 2 civilians that are killed, there is 1 Hamas fighter that is killed. He says that ratio in the history of modern warfare is unparalleled. What say you? Is that just how war is done here?
The history of modern warfare is changing, and that's something that we're still trying to figure out how to relate to the rules of war and to international humanitarian rules of war. Because the rules of war say that you cannot target a civilian population. You have to only target military infrastructures and target, make your military focus on soldiers or any military infrastructure on the other side. It does not say that you can't have collateral damage. It does not say that you're not allowed to ever have civilian casualties. It says that you have to weigh the civilian casualties as opposed to the military gain. Those rules of war are designed for an era when armies combated each other. Now, when armies are combating terror organizations or insurgents in different conflicts, or even, we could go to different conflicts that's happened in Russia and Ukraine and talk about what's moral and unmoral. In those circumstances, it is a lot more difficult because your enemy is, first of all, not a regular army, and at the same time, it is hidden within civilian population. And the rules of war simply say that you have to weigh the benefits of your strike, in the case of bombardment or of your invasion, as opposed to the potential casualties. Now, Israel does do that. It weighs that, and it does decide if it's worth it or not. But that's a subjective thing. So in that sense, Israel can say that it weighs this more than others, and that as far as it's concerned, the moral outcome of 2 civilians that are killed for every Hamas terrorist that is killed is justified in that sense. Others can say, well, it's not justified because you're killing 2 civilians for every soldier, so to speak, on the other side. So it's a subjective thing. And I think that in general, we are catching up in terms of maybe we need new rules of war when it comes to fighting organizations, because the United States faced similar things when it came to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm not saying that it's justified or unjustified. What I'm saying is that every country is responsible to weigh the potential in casualties of its strike as opposed to the military gain. Israel has done that and determined, for example, what it did in the north of the Gaza Strip was justified. Now, Israel today also published that in terms of artillery fire, that since the war began, we're coming on 2 months, over 100,000 artillery shells have been fired into the Gaza Strip. That's an astonishing number for the Gaza Strip, which is a total of 151 square miles. So, is that worth it? Is that not worth it? Israel's defense is that it does the calculation and makes these as accurate as possible, so it's justified by the rules of war. But questions of morality are a different question.
Yeah, of course. It seems like Israel has been in this catch-22 about the kind of dichotomy of precise and indiscriminate, since the war began here. And maybe you're alluding to the fact that, the IDF is going to, kind of evolve that definition, that ratio we were just talking about, because this is a new space, a different space, a very densely populated space there in the terrain that is the Gaza Strip. When you talk about moral outcomes, when you talk about equivocation as well, I want to bring up what's been in the conversation throughout the last week about some, especially on social media, also, elected leaders as well, are equivocating when it comes to what happened on October 7th, when it has to do with, sexual assault, rape, at the hands of Hamas, especially in regards to, Israeli women. And so why do you think we're having this conversation now? Do you think people have not come out, people, I mean, at the UN and elsewhere, a lot of these other international bodies have not come out strong enough and said, we believe that mass rape, mass sexual assault against Israeli women did happen, and we're going to investigate it. But you have seen so many of these statements, especially from Israeli officials, come out and say, this happened, and we're going to keep saying that this happened. Maybe we don't have all of the testimony from some of these women because they were shot to death by Hamas, but this happened. Why do you think this is a part of the conversation right now?
Israel's leveled a lot of pressure on the UN and on women's international bodies because of the complete ignoring of the sexual violence that happened on October 7th. Originally, there were a lot of reports of rapes, gender-based violence, sexual violence, and international women's organizations in the United Nations that are usually very quick to condemn any such violence took their time. They took their time, and when they finally did put out a statement, the statement was much more mundane. It was, these things need to be investigated. And Israel very, very persistently pressured international organizations to say, no, you have to recognize that this happened. There is also a complication on Israel's side, which is, and this is a technicality, but it's a technicality that ended up mattering. When Israeli health officials arrived in the scenes of October 7th, officially, they treated it as a war zone, not as a crime scene. That matters greatly because when they were actually collecting bodies and looking at the idea of forensic evidence, they did not treat it as a crime scene. So a lot of the offenses, the sexual offenses that occurred, were documented in the reports of soldiers that were taking a body, and they may have written, I'm not going to get into gruesome details, but may have written, they saw this and this on the body, file that away. They saw this and this on the body, file that away. And instead of treating it as a crime scene, saying this person was clearly raped, this person, their genitals were clearly mutilated. That's how you treat a crime scene as opposed to a war zone. So it's also taken time on Israel's side for the forensic evidence to be coming out, for Israel to now also go to the UN and say, this is the evidence. This is not just allegations, right? There was, at the beginning, right after October 7th, Prime Minister Netanyahu told President Biden that there were evidence of mass rapes. And then this almost had to be backtracked because there actually wasn't evidence. It was just being stated at that time.
It was
and
now,
sorry?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was secondhand testimony from, like you were saying, people who had seen, these female victims who didn't make it out alive on October 7th. Some of them men as well. And that's why, which I thought was a really, really weird comparison. People were likening it to the Me Too movement and moment from, 3 or 4 years ago. And I just want to kind of interrupt here. We got a statement in from the Israeli Association of Rape Crisis Centers. The head of that organization said, most of the people I assume that have passed this kind of terror are dead because they were shot. There is information from people who saw what happened, But everyone should understand there should not be any anticipation that the survivors will come and speak out loud with their faces. It's not like Me Too. This is a horrible and different thing here, because there are people who are demanding that some of these women who suffered at the hands of Hamas, hostages possibly, the claims of sexual abuse and rape thrown out there, should come in front of cameras and testify to the like.
And of course, that's a horrendous demand, right? It's the same thing that, to demand, it's almost like demanding of children who have been molested, well, if you want to be believed, come forth. That unto itself is a horrendous demand. However, what I'm again suggesting is, why did this take time? Is a combination of two things. There was an inexcusable ignoring on the part of the international organizations that we can talk about, why this happened and the political backgrounds, the political biases, and et cetera. But the fact is that there was this ignoring that's starting to break down. Even the UN is starting to see that it cannot just say, well, there was a lot of violence, we don't know. No, there's actually more evidence. But in terms of actual evidence, forensic experts that can come and say, we have looked at the bodies, that is also now coming out of Israel in a way that didn't come out initially. As you said, initially it was more hearsay, and that ended up in situations that were very complicated, like the LA Times, for example, quoted someone who said that there were mass rapes, but then when it was asked for any evidence, actually they had heard from someone, and they ended up retracting that statement. So that's a very different system now, because now there is more and more evidence from forensic experts that couldn't get to the scene up front because it was defined as a war zone rather than a crime scene.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting that, this has to be, but it's important because it has to be confirmed. There have to be credible allegations, and that will kind of bear out in time. But the rapidity with which to kind of doubt or even deny that it happened struck me really too, because when you talk about equivocation, Congresswoman from Washington, the Democrat Pramila Jayapal, issuing this statement today, clarifying some of these remarks that she made on some of the Sunday shows, I believe on CNN. And she says this: "Let me be completely clear again that I unequivocally condemn Hamas's use of rape and sexual violence as an act of war. This is horrific, and across the world we must stand with our sisters, families, and survivors of rape and sexual assault everywhere to condemn this violence and hold perpetrators accountable." She says, "What I said Sunday in speaking about Hamas and rape was, I have condemned what Hamas has done. I've condemned all of the actions. Rape is horrific. Sexual assault is horrific. It is what I believe, and I will continue to condemn the atrocities committed by Hamas and continue to call for Hamas's defeat. My comment about balance was not about rape and not intended to minimize rape and sexual assault in any way. It was about recognizing the tremendous pain and trauma of so many Israelis, Palestinians, and their diaspora communities in this terrible war." So she was going on to kind of clarify there. A lot of people have kind of picked up on her statements on Sunday. She was on with CNN's Dana Bash, where she kind of used the word balance, and that kind of triggered everyone's equivocating alarm bells here. And so that was her kind of statement on that matter. Alon, thanks so much for being with us. I know we talked to you a lot, but this war continues. Any last thoughts? What are you going to be looking for in the next couple of days?
We're likely to see very, very intensive battles in the next couple of days. The IDF is moving into 3 Hamas major strongholds. One of these is Jabalia refugee camp in the north, where Hamas maintains one of its strongest battalions and units. One of these is Sajaiya, which is a neighborhood in Gaza City, both of them in the north of Gaza City, which the IDF has not taken over yet. And one of them is Khan Yunis in the southern parts of the Gaza City, of the Gaza Strip. So we're likely to see, and we're seeing now Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, we're likely to see very, very intense battles, because in Khan Yunis, unlike in the north of Gaza Strip, the IDF is not going to manage to uproot so many Palestinians. So you're going to have a lot of civilians on the ground. This is going to lead likely, unfortunately, to more casualties of civilians, but also to more casualties on the IDF side, because that's just how the nature of war and how things get complicated. So the next couple of days are going to be, unfortunately, very, very intense, very, very critical. What I'm mostly looking for is what is going to be the IDF's plan after that, because I do believe that they'll take over in the north, Jabalia and Sajaiya. After Khan Yunis, there are still some substantial cities. There's Rafah in the south, there's Deir al-Balah in the center of the Gaza Strip, and I don't know if the IDF is planning to go city by city, in which case we're going to see this going on for many more weeks, or if after Khan Yunis they're planning some sort of different arrangement. That's mostly what I'm looking for. These are going to be very intense battles, but what's going to happen next? What are the indications of that?
All right. Dr. Alon Burstein, we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for your time, your insight. Definitely be speaking again. Talk soon.
Thank you. Have a good day.